The road to the ranch lay hot and endless beneath the high sun, dust shimmering like smoke over the earth. A lone figure walked it with a bundle tucked against her side, skirts faded to the color of sand, and her shoes so thin the ground bit through them. Ava did not falter, though the burn in her feet and the ache in her shoulders begged her to stop. She had stopped before in other towns on other porches, and each time had been told with narrowing eyes and shaking heads that no one had worked for her. The world had turned small and mean since her husband's grave swallowed him, but she still carried herself with a proud spine, even if hunger gnawed her from the inside out. Pride was all she had left, and even that had begun to crack. When she reached the wooden gate that leaned askew on rusted hinges, she paused and pressed her hand against it. The boards were splintered, the paint peeled to gray, but it marked the edge of land still owned, still alive. Beyond stretched a ranch with fields of parched grass, a weathered barn, and a house standing stubborn in the glare of daylight. A dog barked once, and then fell silent. She let her breath steady before pushing the gate and walking through. The crunch of gravel under her worn soles seemed loud, and her shadow reached long ahead of her until it touched the boots of the man who had stepped from the shade of the porch. He was broad-shouldered, sun-browned, and looked carved from the very soil he stood on. His hat was low over his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his stare. A man alone, she thought, yet not broken by it. His stance spoke of labor, his silence of habit. She swallowed, fingers clutching the cloth bundle at her side as if it were a shield, and lifted her chin. "Hire me as your cook," she said, voice steady though it wavered inside her chest. "I've nowhere to go." The words came out plain, bare as bone, yet in them lived her entire story. The graveyard stone she had left behind, the room she had been asked to leave, the cold glances of women who turned their backs on a widow, too young and too poor to be welcomed. She did not ask for pity. She asked for a chance, though the asking itself stripped her of something she had once thought untouchable. The man's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her with an unreadable gaze. A cicada screeched from a fence post, filling the silence, until his voice finally broke it. "I don't need charity cases." His words fell blunt, like stones. He turned slightly, as though to retreat back into the cool shadow of his porch. Her throat tightened, but she held her ground. "I'm not charity. I can work. I can make bread from near nothing, stretch stew for days, mend what's torn. I'll earn my place." His eyes flicked over her, not with hunger, but with something guarded, as though measuring whether she would crack beneath the first hard wind. She felt her pride strain against the weight of his silence, felt the sting of rejection claw at her skin. She wanted to turn, to walk back down the road and vanish before he could push her further into the dust. But her knees did not bend, and her voice, trembling though it was, rose again. "I only ask for a roof. If you won't have me, say so plain, and I'll keep walking." Something shifted then in his face, almost shame, though he masked it quickly. He glanced at the barren yard, the house where no curtain stirred, the empty porch that echoed only his boots. When his gaze returned to her, it carried a reluctant softness. "You eaten?" he asked. The question startled her. For a moment she only stared, and then she shook her head. He stepped aside and jerked his chin toward the door. "Come in. You can put something on the stove. Then we'll talk." Relief loosened her chest, though it did not show on her face. She nodded, climbed the steps, and entered a house stripped of gentleness. Dust lay on the mantel, dishes in the sink, the air heavy with silence. Yet to her it was shelter, and in shelter lived hope. She set down her bundle, unwrapped her few pans, and searched the shelves. There was little cornmeal, beans, a bit of lard, but her hands moved with the rhythm of memory, of kitchens once warm with laughter. She kneaded dough, stirred beans, coaxed flavor from scraps. The man, Jack, she learned when he muttered his name while setting a jug of water on the table, watched her with a kind of wary fascination, as though he had forgotten the sight of someone moving through his kitchen with purpose. When she placed bread and beans before him, he ate in silence, though not without appreciation. His fork slowed, his gaze lifting to her face more than once. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the food, on the work, on the chance that had cracked open like light through shutters. "I ain't asking for pity," she murmured after a time, unable to bear the silence. "Just work." "Work's harder than pity," he answered, voice low. Yet in it lay a grudging respect. Their eyes met across the table. For a heartbeat neither looked away. Then he finished his meal, pushed back his chair, and stood. "You can stay. We'll see if you last." It was not warmth, not welcome, but it was a doorway, and she stepped through. Days bled into one another. She rose with the sun, baked bread, swept floors, tended chickens. He rose earlier still, worked the fields, mended fences, rode the far lines of his land. Their paths crossed in small ways. A jug of water left for him, a chair he repaired for her, a fence post he drove while she steadied the boards. No declarations passed between them, only gestures, quiet as the wind through the grass. Yet the town noticed. Whispers spread along the boardwalk and through the mercantile. Women's eyes narrowed, tongues wagged. "She's in his house already," one said. "Widows learn quick how to land on their feet," said another. Ava heard them when she went for flour, their words sharp as thorns. Shame colored her cheeks, but she held her head high, though her hands trembled as she tied the twine on her bundle. Jack heard his own share. At the saloon a man laughed. "Your cook's pretty enough to stir a man's hunger." Jack's jaw flexed, but he said nothing, only drank and left, the comment gnawing at him long into the night. He found her sitting on the porch under the stars, eyes fixed on the sky, as if it alone might hold her. He lowered himself onto the step beside her. "I only wanted a roof," she whispered, voice tight. "Not more talk behind my back." "Talk dies quicker than truth," he said after a pause. "Let 'em wear themselves out." The defense was quiet, but it lit something in her chest. Through work she found herself again. Bread rose beneath her hands. Curtains fluttered at the windows she mended. Laughter slipped unbidden from her lips when the hens chased one another through the dust. Jack heard that laughter and felt something in him shift. He had lived years in silence, the house an echo of loneliness. Yet now each room seemed fuller, warmer. He did not speak aloud, but his eyes followed her more, lingering on the curve of her shoulders bent to a task, on the way sunlight caught strands of her hair. But gossip cut deeper than knives. One afternoon, as she passed through town, a voice sneered loud enough for all to hear. "Living in a man's house without a ring, shameful." The words struck her like a whip. That evening she packed her bundle, hands trembling, heart pounding. When Jack came in from the field and saw her standing with her belongings at her side, his chest tightened. "You leaving?" His voice carried more fear than he meant to reveal. "They're right," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't belong here. Not like this." For a moment silence hung heavy. Then he stepped closer, his voice rough with urgency. "You walk away now. This place'll turn colder than it ever was. Don't do that to me." His words startled her, stripped of the calm, reserve he always wore. She turned to him, tears streaking her cheeks, and in that moment saw not just a man, but a soul as lonely as her own. The next day the sun climbed bright and merciless over the ranch. Dust hung in the air as Jack stood before the doorway, a small silver ring held tight in his calloused fingers. His heart pounded, louder than any horse's gallop. Ava stood on the threshold, bundle still near her feet, her eyes wide and searching. He sank to one knee, dust swirling around him, and his voice carried raw and unguarded. "Ava, I don't want just a cook. I want you. Your strength, your laughter, your sorrow, all of it beside me." The words tumbled from him like stones he had carried too long. Her breath caught, tears trembling on her lashes. "Are you sure?" she whispered, voice breaking. "I've brought you nothing but trouble." "More sure than anything I ever built with my hands," he said, his eyes fierce with truth. He took her hand, slid the plain silver ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years let the walls around him fall. She bent, pressed her forehead against his, tears of joy mixing with dust. The cicadas sang, the sun bathed them in light, and the house behind them no longer felt empty. In that doorway they stood not as a lonely widow and a guarded rancher, but as two souls who had found a home in each other. Some love does not arrive with thunder or flame. It comes in a loaf of bread, a fence repaired, a silence shared. It grows in small mercies, patient and steadfast, until it blooms into something unbreakable. If ever you find yourself lost, remember this. Salvation may not roar down the road. It may come quietly, in an outstretched hand, in the simple courage to stay when the world tells you to go. And when it comes, you will know, as they knew in the dust and the daylight, that you are no longer alone.